Central Park is the most famous city park in the world. But did you know, of its 843 acres, every single tree, shrub, and flower were placed by design, and not by nature? I'm Michael Wyetzner. I've been an architect in New York City for over 35 years. And today, I'm going to show you some of the hidden details that make Central Park the greatest metropolitan park in the world. In the 1840s, the concept for a large-scale park in Manhattan was proposed by poet William Cullen Bryant and one of the fathers of American landscape architecture, Andrew Jackson Downing. Their dream would come to life in the 1850s when the city of New York held a design competition for the Central Park on the island of Manhattan. Over 30 entries were submitted, and the ultimate winner was the park as we know it today, designed by landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted and architect Calvert Vaux. Behind me is the dairy. This may not be one of the most famous buildings in the park, but it has a tangible connection to one of the initial requirements of the design competition, and is part of what made Vaux and Olmsted's design so ingenious and distinct from the other submissions. This building is in the center of the Children's District, which was incorporated into the design after the competition in order to accommodate younger visitors to the park. The dairy was a place for children to have access to fresh milk, which at the time in the late 1800s was not something everybody had. And you can see it has a bit of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale feeling to it. But there's another part of this building that you can't see, that extends down 2 stories to the ground just on the other side of that fence, where it meets one of the transverse roads that allow traffic to cut through the park. A transverse road is basically just a road that allows traffic to cross through the park, which is important because the park covers 51 city blocks north to south. The original design competition required a minimum of 4 transverse roads across the park. Everybody else essentially left them on the surface, which cut the park into basically 5 equal pieces. Vaux and Olmsted's design was the only one that designed them in such a way that the traffic would be on a lower level than the rest of the park, essentially submerging them so that the immersion and nature of park guests would not be disturbed. This piece of iron sticking out of this boulder is not an oversight. In fact, it's a survey bolt that marks the original street grid of Manhattan. The original Commissioner's Plan of 1811 never included designs for a large park in the middle of the city. But the streets that were once here were removed, and the land was incorporated into the park, and it was really quite a transformation. At the time this park was conceived, the entire city wasn't as densely populated as it is today. But there were still settlements in the area that would become the park, including Seneca Village, one of the earliest free black settlements in New York. Everyone living on what would become park land was relocated by eminent domain, the controversial government mechanism for seizing property where owners are compensated but must vacate. And Seneca Village, tragically, was included in that. But it wasn't just relocating homes that took place. Vaux and Olmsted's design called for a radical departure in the thinking of what a grand civic garden should be. They rejected the idea of highly formal, rigid gardens like those designed exclusively for the wealthy. Instead, they proposed a naturalistic setting, filled with meadows, woodlands, gurgling streams, and surprising vistas. The resulting work involved shifting over 5 million cubic yards of soil, planting over 500,000 trees and shrubs, and excavating more than 7 lakes and other bodies of water, all done by hand. In fact, the boulders like this one, which the bolt is sticking out of, are the only original pieces of natural landscape in the park. And even many of these were unearthed, scraped, and cleaned to appear as they do today. This is the last remaining survey bolt in Central Park, and I don't want to spoil the fun of finding it for you, so I'll let you search the 843 acres for it. Central Park is a big place, and it's easy to get turned around. But if you do, here's a tip. There are more than 1,800 lampposts in the park that tell you where you are, if you know where to look. At the base of the lamppost, you can find a set of numbers that indicate where you are in the park. But it's a bit of a secret code. The first 2 numbers represent the nearest cross street between 59th Street and 110th. And the last 2 numbers tell you which side of the park you're on. Even numbers mean east, and odd numbers mean west. Over my shoulder, you could see the Bethesda Terrace, at the center of which is the beautiful Bethesda Fountain. A grand fountain was also one of the original requirements for the design competition. And this one satisfies that requirement and commemorates the importance of water in New York City. Titled Angel of the Waters, this sculpture was created by sculptor Emma Stebbins, who was the first woman to receive a commission for a major public work in New York City. The statue commemorates the completion of the Croton Aqueduct in 1842, which brought fresh water to New York City, which was actually a really big deal because before that, cholera and yellow fever were a big issue because of unclean water. And in fact, Bethesda Terrace takes its name from the Gospel of St. John, which refers to the healing waters of Bethesda in Jerusalem. Although now it is filled with sculptures depicting historical figures such as William Shakespeare, Robert Burns, and Sir Walter Scott, Angel of the Waters was the only sculpture that was created as part of the original design of the park. And even though this statue was created by a woman, all of the statues depicting real people in the park were only of men, until the statue of Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was created in 2020. These later statues line possibly the most recognizable part of the park, known as the Mall, which has been featured in countless films and TV shows. This is one of the most formal design elements of the park, a grand promenade that leads directly to Bethesda Terrace, which the designers called the heart of the park. The city was reluctant to build the terrace at first due to costs, but Vaux convinced them by saying nature first, second, and third, architecture after a while. And basically what that means is nature has been the priority, but at some point we need some architecture. And this became the place for it. The design of the arcade is like the nave of a church, but submerged. It has this incredible ceiling with over 15,000 tiles made in England by the Minton Tile Company, who famously made tiles for many cathedral floors in Europe. This arcade is actually the only place in the world where these tiles are used for a ceiling. Although it is highly ornate and ingeniously designed, it also remains true to the naturalistic vision of the park's overall design, with carvings depicting natural scenes as well as symbols of the Four Seasons. The act of walking down these steps through the arcade and out to the terrace is one of the great architectural experiences in New York City. You walk down the stately mall, step down into this dimly lit underground space. Basically, you're just walking under a roadway, and suddenly you're in this church-like, almost sacred space. The rows of stone arches, the imported English tile ceiling, the intricate trompe-l'oeil panels, it all creates an atmosphere of reverence. And then when you emerge, it opens onto this grand terrace with the statue of an angel set against the backdrop of the lake and the forest in the distance. Over my shoulder is what's known simply as the lake. It's actually only 4 feet deep, but it covers 22 acres. So in addition to the lake, there's 6 other man-made bodies of water in the park, including the Harlem Mere, the loch, the reservoir, the pond, and others. And they were all intended to have a calming effect, echoing the serenity of natural bodies of water in the natural landscape. But of course, none of this is naturally occurring. It was all designed and constructed. Even the beautiful waterfalls that you see in Central Park are fed by tap water. You can actually drink them. The idea to create naturalistic vistas throughout the park was partly inspired by the paintings of the Hudson River School. These paintings were enormous in scale and depicted awe-inspiring natural scenes. Some of them are hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which of course is situated inside the park. In fact, the original Met building was designed by Calvert Vaux, along with Jacob Ray Mould. The other notable feature about this lake is the bridge that crosses it, the Bow Bridge. It was originally designed as a suspension bridge, like the Brooklyn Bridge, but they decided to go with an arched bridge because they were concerned that the towers would distract from the naturalistic setting. The whole bridge is cast iron with a span of 87 feet. It's actually the second oldest cast iron bridge in the United States. There's over 36 bridges in the park. Known as arches, most of them are both bridges and tunnels, which is a very New York thing. Each one is unique and ornate and has its own personality and character. But even more importantly, they are also very clearly visible examples of the way the park is organized for visitors to navigate it. There's actually 4 vertical layers to the park. The transverse roads, which are submerged below grade, and 3 other circulation paths. The drives, which were intended for horses and carriages, the bridle paths for horseback riding, and the footpaths for pedestrian traffic. These arches, these bridges and tunnels, intertwine vertically, so that these different circulation paths can cross each other without creating traffic at the intersections. The drives pass over the bridle and footpaths, allowing uninterrupted use of each different circulation path. It's also a really clever way to separate these different types of transit while maintaining a seemingly pastoral landscape. And so it actually accommodates a lot of traffic without it feeling like there's a lot of traffic. Vox and Olmsted intended the park to be enjoyed by all the people of the city, working class and wealthy. But at the time, an unfortunate byproduct of these vertically layered circulation paths was that they also separated the classes from one another, because people of lesser means couldn't afford horses, let alone carriages. Thankfully, that is no longer the case, and the paths are used interchangeably by everybody from all walks of life. So behind me, you can see Belvedere Castle. Belvedere basically just means beautiful view in Italian. It's built on Vista Rock, one of the highest points in Central Park. It was intended as a place to get broad, sweeping views of the park and the surrounding cityscape. There are many places in the park where you can lose sight of the buildings that surround you and feel removed from the city. But climbing the tower of Belvedere Castle brings modern Manhattan back into view and reminds you that this natural landscape sits within a great metropolitan city. The other function of this high vantage point is that Belvedere Castle serves as a weather station. So every time you hear the amount of rainfall or snowfall in Central Park, they are referring to that spot right behind me. The castle is made out of Manhattan schist, which is the same stone found throughout the park, like the boulder that the survey bolt is driven into. And it appears to actually grow out of that rock and become a building. What's really interesting about this building is that it's built at 3/4 scale, which makes it appear further away than it actually is, and gives it this sort of magical fairy tale quality. Originally, it was designed to be 2 castles, but the budget was cut, and Jacob Ray Mold designed that wooden pavilion in lieu of the second castle. Some of the other things you can see from the castle is the Great Lawn, the Delacour Theater, where they perform Shakespeare in the park, and Turtle Pond, which actually is home to turtles. The Great Lawn was actually a reservoir when the park was first built. But in 1931, they filled it in with rubble from the excavation for the foundations of Rockefeller Center and the 8th Avenue subway. And now, this beautiful green expanse is the site of many famous concerts and home to a number of sports fields and other community activities. You can also see the Ramble from the tower of Belvedere Castle. The Ramble is one of the parts of the park that feels the most like it's always been here, like it's completely natural and not man-made, and that you could get lost on a walk in the woods. And it's the perfect manifestation of the idea that a soothing walk in nature could happen right in the middle of New York City. There's so many amazing things in Central Park that we just didn't have time to cover. If you'd like to see a part 2 on Central Park, let us know in the comments below.